Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and I have on the line Mr. Dave Kranzler from InvestmentResearchDynamics.com. And Dave notified me on Thursday, February the 5th, that the state of Kansas had decided to go completely crazy and go full-blown into the casino with the state employees' retirement funds. And this has to do with a massive $1.5 billion with a B bond purchase that is going to create more debt for the already insolvent retirement funds for the state employees of Kansas. Looks like that this may be a model going forward for the other states, and I'm going to let Dave give you all the details. So here we go. The state of Kansas is looking at issuing a what?
Pension obligation bond.
Pension obligation bond. What does that mean?
What it is it's a state issued municipal bond. So it's a bond that's ultimately backstopped by the taxpayers of the state of Kansas, and they give the money to the state pension fund, which is severely underfunded. And what they're hoping to do is issue the bond at a net cost of under 5% to the state, or issue the bond at a net cost of 5%, say. So the pension fund would be paying out 5% in interest expense, and they're hoping to generate an 8% rate of return. So how they're going to generate an 8% rate of return is anybody's guess, because there's not anything out there. There's no fixed income investment out there except very, very distressed junk bonds that pay 8%. So what's going to happen here is basically the pension fund is badly underfunded. And so what's going to happen here is it's going to become even more underfunded because it's not going to be able to carry the cost of this bond.
So it's confiscation.
Well, it's a Hail Mary. It's really an act of desperation by the state to shore up a badly underfunded pension fund. Now, who would have thunk the state of Kansas pension fund was so badly underfunded? We know Illinois and California are.
Yes.
We know New Jersey and New York are. And I know Colorado is. But who would have thunk that Kansas was underfunded like this?
They're all underfunded. There
all
isn't any money in any of the.
How do you try and remedy the problem of something that's underfunded? Issue debt.
Well, of course.
This is a joke. Now ultimately, what's going to happen here is the stakeholders of the pension fund, which are the public employees in the state of Kansas, they're going to become in an even more negative equity position, and ultimately the taxpayers of the state of Kansas are going to have to backstop this bond. So the state of Kansas taxpayers are going to become even more on the hook for the public retirement pension fund in Kansas, which is severely underfunded.
Is that not considered confiscation? I mean, if they're going to take my retirement account, my IRA, my 401k, and they're going to convert it into a state funded or a state pension fund, that's confiscating my money, right?
Well, no. The state pension fund is the pension fund for teachers, cops,
for the
firemen,
state employees. Yes, I understand.
The state employees. Okay, they don't. It's in lieu of an IRA or a 401k. That's your retirement fund when you're a public employee of any state. Your retirement fund is the state pension fund.
Yes.
Okay, so it's in a negative equity position because it's got a negative net worth, so it's basically technically insolvent.
Right.
Okay. So what the state's doing is they're going to issue taxpayer-backed municipal bonds and take that cash and give it to the pension fund to invest. Now the pension fund will be the obligor of the interest payments and the debt service. But they're making the assumption that they can invest the proceeds of that bond at a higher and earn a higher rate of interest than the interest that they have to pay out on the debt. I'm saying they're not going to be able to do that. There hasn't been a pension fund in the country that's earned their projected return for 20 years, probably. I mean, it's not just the state pension funds that are severely underfunded. It's the big company private pension funds. They're all severely underfunded also.
Well, that's been my understanding on just about all of them.
Right, but see, this now the state of the taxpayers. I mean, the taxpayers are on the hook ultimately for funding, state employee pension payments.
Will this wind up in a similar situation
Well,
as Detroit?
ultimately, if the pension fund defaults on this debt, the taxpayers are the obligors, the state of Kansas.
Completely different.
Illinois, the article talks about how Illinois does it. This is the director of the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. He says the bonds, quote, can be used beneficially in some situations, but they are often inappropriately used by the desperate and irresponsible. Okay, the article itself says, where Kansas sees a market opportunity, some bond investors see a warning. Pension obligation bonds remain only a sliver of the $3.6 trillion municipal market, even as many states wrestle with oversized retirement system shortfalls. Such debt offerings can be seen as a sign of distress, since governments such as California, New Jersey, and Illinois are among the largest issuers and hold the largest or the lowest credit ratings among states.
Oh my goodness!
I mean, this is a Hail Mary that the state of Kansas is tossing to try and generate income for its pension fund, its state employee pension fund. There's no way they're going to cover the cost of the interest on that. What are they going to invest in? I mean, let's say they put it all in stocks. I mean, the stock market, if anything, has more risk to the downside than the upside. And even if the stock market were just to go flat, you're not going to earn an 8% rate of return on an annualized basis. And what about any kind of fixed income security, mortgages and treasury bonds? I mean, a 30-year treasury bond pays 2.5%.
So that leaves about 5.5% deficit.
Well, it means that they're going to issue this bond. Let's say they somehow get this bond off at 4.5%. That means they're still having a negative 2% carry, even if they take all the proceeds and invest it in a 2.5% long bond. Or let's say they invested in a 3.5% mortgage bond. They still have a negative 100 basis point carry on this thing. I mean, in order for them to achieve an 8% risk in a fixed income portfolio of investments, they're going to have to take extreme non-investment grade credit risk. They're going to have to invest in like triple C rated companies. And the risk there, when something is rated triple C, the probability of default is enormous. I mean, you can't do that. You can't take pension money and invest it in In fact, most pension funds, if not all of them, they prohibit like non-investment grade investments. Some of them have carve-outs for a small amount of it, but it's not that big. Well, I'm sure this one is the same way. They probably have a limited ability to invest in anything that's not investment grade, and that's the only place you're going to get yields.
Well, that's been my understanding is that pension funds in particular, they have to abide by certain rules as far as they can't invest in garbage, right? Or I mean, I think you said that they may have a small amount that they can invest into, much more risky assets, but I didn't think that they were allowed to invest in anything that was less than an A rating at least.
Well, all public pension funds now have carve-outs where they can invest in, a certain percentage of non-investment grade debt, but it's not, in order to have a fixed income portfolio that would have any hope of covering the interest expense of this debt, you have to have it all in non-invest in junk bonds at this point. Or even if you put half in junk bonds and half in stocks, if they're doing what do they say? It's a $1.5 billion proposed sale. So you put 750 million in stocks, the stock market goes flat or it crashes, boom, you're wiped out.
That is an act of desperation. Right in the middle of the so-called heartland.
Yeah, I had no idea Kansas was in such desperate straits. I mean, I know that Illinois, New York, New Jersey, California, Texas. I've read North Carolina has issues. I know Colorado's way underfunded.
Tennessee's underfunded.
They're
They're
all
all
underfunded.
underfunded, I
They're all
believe.
underfunded, especially if they had to mark all of their private equity type investments and their real estate investments. You mark to market that stuff, you're way underfunded. Way underfunded.
Do you think that other states are going to possibly move in the same direction?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the demand for this debt. I mean, well, it'll be an interesting deal to watch to see how quickly it gets snapped up. I mean, it's guaranteed by the state of Kansas, and it's going to have a higher interest rate on it than probably a standard municipal bond. So yeah, I think you're going to get, you probably get like brokerage firms like Merrill Lynch and Smith Barney and Morgan Stanley. They're probably going to be all over this, dumping it into their high net worth investment system, their high net worth management system. That's where these bonds are going to end up. They're going to end up in high net worth taxable investment accounts.
Would the state of Kansas, would they be able? I mean, that's a big farm state. I mean, would they be able to tie it to the farmland of these?
No, it's a general obligation. It reverts into a general obligation bond of the taxpayers if the pension fund defaults on it, which it will.
So at the end of the day, what you see happening is the good people of Kansas, the state of Kansas, and the general population being on the hook for all of this debt that they're getting ready to create.
Yes. Here's a academic study done by a guy named Alan Beckman in 2010, and this is part of his description of a pension obligation bond. Pension obligation bonds are a taxable subset of general obligation bonds or certificates of participation issued to close unfunded pension liabilities. So a GO bond is basically a general obligation bond of the municipality or the state that issues it, which means that the taxpayers ultimately are on the hook for it, but they're going to try and service the debt out of the income generated from investing the proceeds of this bond, which I'm saying they're not even going to have. They have no chance in hell of that happening. In either scenario, the governments issue this debt, invest the proceeds in their pension funds, and hope to engage in interest rate arbitrage. So in other words, what they're trying to do here is they issue, 4.5% interest expense debt, and they're hoping to invest those proceeds and earn a higher rate of return than the cost of servicing this debt. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's what when he's referring to the interest rate arbitrage here. But you tell me, what part of the financial universe can you possibly earn more than 4.5% on a fixed income investment? I mean, short-term European sovereign debt from the better European issuers like Germany, their short-term interest rates are negative. I mean, their long bonds are even lower than ours, and ours is at 2.5 or 2.6% right now. I mean, what's this? What's the Kansas City State Pension Fund? Where are they going to put this money? They're going to buy Greek bonds? I mean, come on. This to me. This is just, it does nothing other than smack of complete desperation. And we're probably going to, if there's a high demand for these bonds, which there conceivably will be, because every high net worth idiot out there who gives his money over to Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan, you fill in the blank. Every guy out there is looking for yield. So this is going to appeal to that. That's usually who buys munis anyway, or high net worth guys, and putting them in taxable accounts.
Why would you invest in something that doesn't add up?
Because they don't know. It's going to be their wealth advisor at Wells Fargo. Their wealth advisor at Wells Fargo. Actually, Waddell Reed. That's a Kansas City based investment firm. All the wealth advisors there are going to be beating the phones on this. I mean, if this bond gets issued at 4.5%, and let's say you're a high net worth guy and your marginal tax rate is 30%, that means that the effective yield on this bond for you is going to be 642. There isn't anything out there that carries the backing of the state tax revenue stream that has a 6.5% yield on it. I mean, that yield right there is almost 4 times the yield on a 10-year treasury.
Jeez.
So that's why they're probably going to be able to get these bonds issued, and then I'll bet you we start to see these deals spread like wildfire, because every state is in that predicament.
Yes.
But it's just pure desperation, because the pension funds are not going to be able to service this debt. They're not going to be able to earn those returns. That's why these pension funds are all in an underfunded position anyway, because, the bogey for pension funds for the last 40 years has been 8%. The reason they're underfunded is they can't earn that kind of return.
But once again, why would if I'm a fund manager and I'm looking to invest in this, why would I invest in it? Why would I take my earnings that I have sitting over here, say, $100 million? Why would I buy those bonds?
Well, you're not a mutual fund's not going to buy these. Let's say you're a high net worth manager at J.P. Morgan or Wells Fargo or Waddell Reed, and you've got a guy there with 10 million in cash, earning 0.7% in 5-year treasuries. Well, you're going to swap that money out and try and buy as much of this paper as you can, because all of a sudden your yield versus a 5-year treasury is going to go from 0.7% to an effective after tax rate of 6.5%. So that's why you're going to buy it. And you're going to say, I don't care if the pension fund can stand behind this or not. The state of Kansas is ultimately the obligor.
Sounds like.
And that's who municipal bonds, especially high risk municipal bonds, that's who they cater to. They cater to, the high net worth money manager or investment advisor. That's who buys this garbage.
That's what it sounds like, is garbage. I mean, it
is garbage.
Sounds like a Ponzi scheme.
Well, our whole system's a Ponzi scheme, but this is just more evidence of how desperate it's getting.
Do you even think that we're going to see the end of this year? I mean, much less, 20 years or 30 years, whatever this bond is going to be issued at?
It's a 10-year bond.
Okay, 10 years.
I don't know. I don't know when this. I've had that conversation with a couple of people today. How long is it going to be before this country hits the wall? And my view is it won't hit the wall until the dollar collapses, and I would bet against that happening this year. I think there's still a lot of capacity in the global system for money printing before the currencies really, really do the waterfall maneuver against gold.
You don't think that Greece is going to be a trigger point?
Well, you know how I feel about Greece. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, they're gonna find a mutually agreeable solution to Greece, because if Greece defaults on its debt, it'll trigger a derivative disaster. Interestingly, Deutsche Bank issued a research piece earlier today in which they said there will be a solution, essentially. And ironically, and it's probably why Deutsche Bank issued this research piece, Deutsche Bank is probably one of the most at risk of all the big banks if Greece defaults because they're Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan are the two largest derivatives players out there.
And Deutsche Bank, don't they hold most of the debt
Well, I don't know.
from
I don't know
Greece?
what distribution is of Greece sovereign debt, or it doesn't matter what the debt is. It's because what you really want to know is who holds all the OTC credit default swaps. Who are the counterparties? That's what you want to see, and there's no way to get that information. But you can sort of deduce who the big players are: Deutsche Bank, J.P. Morgan, ironically, Morgan Stanley. I mean, Morgan Stanley is they're probably more at risk for European credit default swaps than any other U.S. bank in terms of being at risk as a percentage of their book capital.
Do you see them being the new scapegoat like Lehman Brothers? And
No, because I think when it does go down, it's all going to go down at once.
yeah, how are the banking systems that are outside of the Western world? How will it affect them?
Well, then it's all the fiat currency will collapse at once. But again, the trigger point's probably not until the dollar collapses, and I don't know when that happens. I think it's going to take longer than the gold bug corner of the world thinks it should happen or wants it to happen. And I could be wrong. I don't know, but it's just what based on my observations of how this stuff seems to be playing out.
It's taking a long time. I mean, it's been floating for what 44 years now. 40. We're in rapidly approaching the 44th year because it was 71 when everything was unpegged from gold, right?
Yeah, but it was slowly unraveling before that because the peg
Yes.
from gold really, at least the dollar started getting severed from gold when Lincoln was the president. That's when they first really severed the dollar. Started to. It was subtle, but they started to. But I would have thought we reached the tipping point by now. And I thought that's what 2008 was going to be, and obviously they had a solution for it. I'm sure the guys that are operating behind the scenes. I'm sure they've thought out about all the scenarios, and I'm sure until they know that they can't hold it off any longer. I'm sure they have ways of kicking the can down the road that we have no way of anticipating. I mean, everyone now, the obvious thing is QE4, which now everyone's starting to talk about, but I think it's probably going to be something that'd be a little more creative than QE4.
But what else is there? I mean,
Hey, if I knew,
aside from
I'd be one of them, and I wouldn't be having this conversation.
well, okay.
I mean, no matter how much we try to figure this out, we can only play with the cards that they let us see. We don't know all the cards they're holding.
Well, and the ones that the rules. Obviously, really don't matter because of what happened earlier today with the ECB saying that we're just going to change the rules on Greece.
Well, they didn't change the rules. They just lifted the. They just lifted the. There was a waiver. See, when you put up collateral for repos, it has to be rated a certain level. So, and Greece is junk rated, but the ECB gave them a waiver so that banks could put up Greek sovereign debt as collateral. And so what the ECB did is they took away that waiver, meaning that you can't use Greek sovereign debt now as repo collateral.
Okay, that's changing the rules.
Well,
If there's a rule in place that says you
not really. They changed the rules in the first place, and then they took back the rule change. That's what they did. So,
that's what I mean.
but that's a whole other aspect to this. I mean, not only do we only get to see the cards that they want us to see or let us see, they're holding cards we can't see, and at any given time, they could change the rules. So it
Yes,
doesn't matter what cards that you're actually looking at. At some point, they're going to change the rules.
right. And that very well may be what's going to happen with Greece. And that's what we're seeing what started this whole conversation, that's what we're seeing with Kansas, the state of Kansas, because they can't service, they do not have the funding for the pension fund of the state employees. So therefore, they're going to change the rules, issue more debt in an attempt to service the debt that they already have. And what you were saying is that it's probably not going to work simply because there's nothing out there that's going to produce the type of income or the type of return on their investment in existence. And I would agree with that. I don't think that there's anything out there that's producing 7, 8, 9% return rate.
Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily that they're changing the rules. There's not any rules here that prohibit them from issuing a paper like this. I mean, they can they can do whatever they want, but
that's my
it
point.
does bring up the interesting point in that this pension fund is drastically underfunded. I wonder if there's any mechanism in place to monitor whether or not, so the state is going to issue 1.5 billion, give it to the pension fund, and the pension fund is supposed to invest it all in securities that pay a higher rate of interest than the cost of the debt, presumably, 5% or 4%, wherever the debt gets issued. And so the question is, though, is there a mechanism in place that will make sure that the administrators of the pension fund don't use any of that money to pay current pay obligations? You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Really, what this is doing, I mean, it would be if they could put a vote up to all the pension fund holders, because they're really the stakeholders of this pension fund. Would the stakeholders approve this bond issue? Because, and what I would bet is that the stakeholders that the current retirees who are getting pension fund payments from the fund, they would probably approve it because they know the fund is underfunded and this money will guarantee that they can continue getting their current pay, right? And the youngest stakeholders, if they're paying attention, would vote against this.
Probably.
In fact,
exactly
the really bright ones would say, hey, let's terminate this pension fund, give us our full pay instead of taking some of it and contributing it to this fund, and let us invest that money on our own. That's what the younger stakeholders would do.
That's what they should do as a mental exercise. If they were allowed to do that, wouldn't the fund just blow up at that point or implode?
Yeah, of course it would. And really, the real stooges in this situation are the investors who end up with these bonds in their account, because I bet you these things will never get paid back.
Well, I feel more for I don't care about those people because they're criminal. They're part of the overall problem anyway. And I feel more for the people that have paid in all their life and are getting ready to get the shaft. When does the criminality stop?
When the dollar collapses.
Well, I wish it would collapse. I mean, I hate to say that, but I'm just sick and tired of the criminality that we have to discuss on a daily basis. I really am.
You and me both, but you know what? We got to bring it to people's attention.
I mean, everything is so backwards. And unfortunately, we can only do what we can do, and that's, like you were just saying, trying to keep people informed and bring it to their attention, and hopefully they can do the right thing and will do the right thing and start bringing it to other people's attention.
Exactly.